Hello, this is Mr. Frank, and welcome to I Can Use the Pythagorean Theorem to Find the Missing Side Lengths of Triangles, Day 2. Here's where we are in the unit. So let's start with a review from class today. Today in class we talked about the Pythagorean Theorem and that we can use it to find the missing side of a right triangle. So it has to be a right triangle, and we know it's a right triangle based on this little square here says it's a right triangle. And the Pythagorean theorem says that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the legs of a right triangle, and c is the hypotenuse of a right triangle. The hypotenuse will be the longest side, and it'll be opposite the right angle. See how it's opposite the right angle? So now we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem, where a squared plus b squared equals c squared, to find the hypotenuse. So if you're given a triangle where one leg is 6 units and another leg is 8 units, we need to find how big c is, or the hypotenuse. So we'll use the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'll plug in my numbers. So you see how I plug in 6 for a, I plug in 8 for b, and then c, I have c here, and we're going to square each of those. So 6 squared is 36. 8 squared is 64, and we're going to figure out what c is. But we know that this is going to equal c squared. So when I add them up, I get 100 equals c squared. And another way to think about that is the square root of 100 is going to equal c. So if I take the square root of 100, that means what times itself will equal 100? Well, the answer is either plus 10 or minus 10, and we might not have seen this before. This means plus or minus a number. Because if you remember, if I multiply a positive times a positive, I get a positive, so 10 times 10 is 100, but also negative 10 times negative 10 is also 100, because multiplying a negative times a negative is a positive as well. So the answer is plus or minus 10. Now we know there's no such thing as a negative measurement if we're measuring the side of a triangle, so the answer is going to be 10. So we can get rid of the negative part of this because we know it just doesn't make sense here. In other parts of math, you'll see that it can make sense, but here it doesn't make sense, so we don't use it. So let's try another one, except this time, instead of finding the hypotenuse, we're going to find one of the legs. So we still use the Pythagorean theorem. The only difference now is we're going to solve for a or b, and we're given c. So it's really important that you pay close attention to where you put your numbers. So I'm going to use 6 for A, and I'm going to use 9 for C, and we're going to find B. We're going to find one of the legs. So C is always the hypotenuse. Make sure you follow that. Sometimes people make mistakes with that, so that's a mistake you don't want to make. So 6 squared is 36, 9 squared is 81, so 36 plus B squared will equal 81. So this is, we have to undo the 36. So we'll subtract 36 from both sides, and we get b squared is equal to 45. So b is going to equal the square root of 45. Here's one where you're going to need your calculator, because this is not a perfect square, so it may not be a number that you can quickly just do in your head and figure out what the square root is. So when you put it in the calculator, you'll find that b is, I'm rounding here, but b is roughly equal to plus or minus 6.71 units. And because I know that we can't have negative units, I'll just say that it's 6.71 units. All right, so now it's your turn. Let's find the missing leg. So you need to find x. All right, so you'll use the Pythagorean theorem. Now I have x here, and that's okay. Don't get confused by that. You can use any letter here. The Pythagorean theorem always says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But you can use different variables here. So this x is going to be, you can make it either a or b. You can't make it c, because c is always the hypotenuse right here. So you know you're going to use 45 for the hypotenuse. And don't forget to square everything. All right, so pause here, see how you do, and then come back. All right, let's see how you did. So you should have put 27. You could have put it for a or for b. It doesn't matter which one. So I did it for a. 27 squared plus x squared is equal to 45 squared. So make sure you put this in your calculator. You get 729 plus x squared equals 2025. I now have to undo or subtract this 729, and I end up with x squared is equal to 1296. if I take the square root of that using my calculator, I get x is equal to plus or minus 36. And again, I know it's not going to be a negative distance because that doesn't make sense for the leg of a triangle. So we'll say that it's 36. 36 meters is x, the length of this leg right here. I hope you got that answer. If not, you may want to go back and see my previous slide. That can help you. All right, let's do a little bit more. Let's use the Pythagorean theorem to determine if a triangle is a right triangle. So if we're given three sides of a triangle, we can plug them into the Pythagorean theorem, and if it's true, if one side equals the other side, then we know it's a right triangle. So which number is going to be my hypotenuse here? Well, it's always going to be the biggest number because the hypotenuse is the longest side. So that's what you use for C. Your biggest number will always be used for C. So I have 7 squared plus 24 squared equals 25 squared. Is that true? Is that true? Let's see. That would be 49 plus 576 equals 625. Or 625 equals 625. That is true. So yes, this is a right triangle. So now I want you to figure out if these dimensions are a right triangle. A triangle has 32, 37, and 20-inch sides. Is that a right triangle? Now notice, which one's the biggest one here? It's not the last one like it was in the previous example. Which one's the biggest one here? Because that's what C is going to be. So make sure you always choose the largest of the three numbers to put for C. So I'm going to pause here and let you do this and then come on back. All right, let's see. Actually, we're not going to see how this is. We'll see how that you did it in class tomorrow. I got ahead of myself here. So bring this answer back to class tomorrow and we'll check it then. So if you could take a moment and please capture what you learned or were reminded of and questions that you have. What are they? I'd like to know. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.